Hello, everybody. I'm going to ask some questions. If you don't answer, there's going to be a really long, awkward silence. So this is going to be on you. So if you had the opportunity to meet somebody from Scriptures, Old and New Testament, other than Jesus, who would you want to meet, and what would you ask them?
I'd want to meet Paul.
Nice.
There's probably 100 questions I want to ask him. I mean, if there's a particular question, but I'd probably want to ask him about the time he was stoned in Lister, Derby area, just about how all that went down. It would be really interesting to hear.
Anybody in the Old Testament? Y'all realize I get paid the same if you answer or you don't answer.
David.
David? Oh, that's a good one. Why?
Did a lot of special things. But I want to know how he dealt with the bear and the lion.
Right? It was like, if it was me, it's like, hey, Dad, I lost a couple of sheep, but this is why. So absolutely. I have another question. Do you think, actually, what do you think the main differences are between the Old Testament and the New Testament?
Say that again.
What do you think the main differences are between the Old Testament and the New Testament?
Caleb just said the law, that's right.
The law?
Old covenant law versus the New Testament. New covenant.
Okay. Similarities? Same question, but similarities.
God's in charge.
God's in charge. So I wrote down a few. I'm going to start with the similarities. Both are God-centered with relationship with humanity. Both teach moral principles and highlight faith. And many of the Old Testament prophecy, or all the Old Testament prophecies that are fulfilled in the New Testament, came to pass. So that's the similarities. Differences are Old Testament focuses on the law. Good job, Caleb. Covenant, prophecy, preparation, basically pointing the way to Jesus. And the difference in the New Testament focuses on grace, fulfillment, spreading the gospel, and basically focusing on Jesus' life. How do you think the world sees the differences? You don't think the world sees any differences?
I think they think about the Old Testament, God being
Oh yeah, here we go.
disciplinarian, coming down hard.
God.
And then in the New Testament, just a loving God and all about grace and mercy, and that's it.
Yeah, that's exactly what I wrote down. Basically, Old Testament, judgmental, disciplinarian God, and the new God is, So, by studying the Old Testament and comparing it to the New Testament, how does that help us see the big picture of the Bible's message? Does it?
I mean, the Old Testament was a shadow and a copy of a lot of the things that we were going to experience the reality of in the New Testament, in Jesus. So, studying the Old Testament really aids us in understanding a lot of what we learn in the New Testament. It's there for our learning and our understanding, we're told.
Yeah. So, don't really understand why we have to read Matthew 1, the first, 18 verses. I was like, I didn't know what a begot was until a lot after I started studying. So hopefully you have your Bibles. If you do have, turn to Galatians 5:16. I'm going to read 16 through 18. Galatians 5:16 through 18. So I say, walk by the Spirit, and you will not be gratified the desires of the flesh. For the flesh desires what is contrary to the Spirit, and the Spirit what is contrary to the flesh. They are in conflict with each other, so that they do not do whatever they want. But if you're led by the Spirit, you're not under the law. So I think a lot of times we, as Christians, look at the law and say, not happening anymore. Don't have to really learn it. Don't have to study it. Don't have to be a part of it, because we walk by the Spirit. Which that verse is saying you can't have one without the other. So if you go to Romans chapter 7, verse 4. Romans 7, verse 4. I'm going to read 4 through 6. So my brothers and sisters, you also died to the law through the body of Christ, that you might belong to one another. To him who was raised from the dead, in order that we may bear fruit for God. For we were in the realm of the flesh, the sinful passions aroused by the law were at work in us, so that we bore fruits to death. But now, by dying to what once bound us, we have been released from the law, so that we serve the new way of the Spirit, and not the old way of the written code. So the newness of the Spirit is what we live by now, but we still have the law, and it's not anything that we don't need to study. The biggest problem with the law wasn't God's moral standards. The biggest problem with the law is we couldn't keep it. So the last few weeks, I had been talking to somebody, a friend of mine in California that I grew up with, and we're talking about that. He's Catholic, but we've been talking about that, and he basically said the same thing. The Old Testament God is a lot different than the New Testament God. And I was like, dude, we have the same God. And he started talking about the Ten Commandments. And I basically did this class, so when I go back next month, we're going to play golf and have a study. But I want to take the Ten Commandments and read them and talk about them for a little bit, but I'm going to compare them to different verses in the New Testament, and we're going to see the differences and the similarities of it. I get to teach this week and next week, so if you're not here next week, I know you didn't like this class this week, so hopefully you'll come and let everybody else know. So we're going to start Exodus 20, verse 3. Exodus 20, verse 3.
Mom forgot her hearing aids.
That's okay. Hi! So Exodus 20, verse 3. You shall have no other gods before me. Normally, when I'm teaching a class, I would just say, if we hold on to God, we don't need any other gods. We find freedom in Him in everything. So that's, and then I would say, next testament, or next commandment, sorry. But I'm doing it a little differently. I picked certain verses. You can do this at home. I hope you actually do this at home and find different verses. So the verse I picked, that's the Old Testament verse. The verse I picked in the New Testament is James 1, verse 5. James 1, verse 5. So it says in Exodus 20, verse 3, you shall have no other gods before me. James 1, 5 says, if any of you lack wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault. Now I'm going to ask you some questions. What do you think the similarities are in those two verses? I can read what I wrote, because I had time to study this, and you can be thinking of others. If you want to interject, please interject. So the similarities in both of these verses, both are centered on God as the ultimate authority. Both of them basically say the exact same thing differently. Each put God alone in His rightful source of guidance and direction. whether if it's loyalty that says it in Exodus or wisdom that says in James. Both are relationship focused. They both talk about how we are to relate to God in our daily life. Exodus basically says it to whom you're going to trust and worship. And James says always turn to God. Whatever your situation is, always turn to God, because he's the ultimate authority. So in different ways, they both say the same thing. Don't look anywhere else but to God. Key differences. Anybody else have anything between the two? All right, so the key differences is one's a commandment and the other one's an invitation. So if you look at it, excuse me, you shall not have any other gods. That is basically command, okay? The other one, the invitation, if you lack wisdom, you should. So that's the biggest difference. Both of them are pointing to God, but one's telling you, the other one's inviting you to. Exodus 23 is basically direct, absolute, non-negotiable. James 1-5 is an invitation. It's kind of gentle. It's encouraging. Exodus is the part of the Mosaic law given to Israel. And then James speaks to Christian life, addressing believers, navigating trials and moral decisions. So that's another difference. One focuses on wisdom in James, and the other one focuses on worship, how we are to treat God and how we are to worship Him. The tone in Exodus emphasizes God's holiness and exclusiveness. In James, it emphasizes God's generosity and approachability. So I know growing up, my dad, when he said, "Do not do that," I'm like, "Yes, sir," and then I would stay away from him because the tone he gave me in that. James makes it sound a little bit more approachable. If my dad would come up to me and said, "Probably shouldn't do that," I was like, "Got it, Dad," and then put my arm around him, hang out with him. So it seems like a little bit of a, well, not a little bit, a lot of difference just in the way it's written. So how they fit together. Taken together, the verses show a progression. In Exodus 23, establish who God is, the only one worthy of allegiance. In James 1:5 shows that allegiance plays out by trusting Him in receiving wisdom and self-reliance and still having fear towards Him. All this making sense? I hate when you guys get quiet. Love teaching you guys, but you guys are like, give me one of these or one of these. Go ahead, Gary. You had your hand up.
I did not.
That was just you lifting up your. Got it. Any comments on the first one, Nick?
Yeah, I mean, it shows God has got ultimate power and authority, and in James, in the very generous way towards us.
Yeah. And it's beautiful how you can, and almost everybody here, I think, is a father or has been a mom, and you dealing with your kids. I'm probably one of the best parents here because I never had kids. So I know how to deal with them. But knowing when to crack the whip and knowing when to give a hug and saying it different ways, like I just used the example of my dad. I get to hang out with 30 or 40 kids at a time sometimes. And there's times where when I was at work, if I yelled at a server and I knew that server, if I yelled at them and they'd start crying. If I yelled at another server, he'd say, "Okay, got it." And he'd do a great job. You know, there's times where you pat on the back and there's times where you kick on the rump, is the way I learned how to be a manager. And everybody kind of handles it differently. I think us as Christians, knowing our God is so approachable, and you see and you hear and you read, just going into the Holy of Holies, what you had to do just to get past the next to get to that. So God wasn't as approachable. But with us now, I mean, we get to talk to the being that spoke everything into existence. And so you can't get any more approachable than that. So thank you, Vic. All right, Exodus 20, verse 4. You shall not make yourself an idol or any likeness of what is heaven above or on earth beneath or in the water under the earth. The verse I chose in the New Testament would be John 14:6. Jesus said to them, I am the way, the truth, the life. No one comes to the Father but through me. So similarities by reading those. John 14:6. So if you have your thumb and your finger on both sections, it'll be easier to read. I have it in front of me written down already, so it makes it easier for me. But what do you think the similarities are between you shall not make yourself an idol and I am the way, the truth, and the life? Go ahead. It's there. I see it coming out. What are the similarities?
There's only one way, there's only one God, there's only one way to God, and that's through Christ.
Yeah, I feel like both of those verses tell you how to approach God. I was just talked earlier, just a second ago, about how God is approachable. That both these verses show us the direction to go. Physical representations. It tells us how to go through Jesus. Both emphasize exclusivity. So there's no other way. There's no other being. I always use the example of if I want to get to Gary's house from my RV, there's a direction I go. I go Cave Creek, turn left on Tatum, pass out by that Shell station where I always get my Slurpee drink, get that drink, and then go the first right, make another right, and go down the street. I can't remember the names of the street, but if I gave those directions to Connor to get to Gary's house, he'd go, huh? Because Connor lives over there.
And Gary doesn't invite me over.
Wow. Wow.
Just
All right, I think we should all go around Connor and have a prayer.
That's good. I actually also wanted to it also, like you said, exclusivity, it also is a bit of a forewarning that other paths do not do that. Right?
Absolutely.
Then so many people choose different paths, that are not made up of the fruit of the Spirit, that are not made up of a way of righteousness. They choose to go and try to pursue material things. They choose to pursue things outside of what we would consider godly ways.
Yeah, absolutely. So I love four-wheel driving, and almost every trail has different difficulties, and most of the difficulties, like you'll have a big huge rock and then a 5-foot drop and then another rock right behind it, or you can go around this way, and we call that the wimpy side. And there's times where we're playing follow the leader, and the guys, I see the obstacle, and I'm like, oh, I don't want to do that. And I go, please turn right, and he turns left. Well, if you're playing follow the leader, you gotta turn left because he did. Plus, you don't want anybody laughing at you. We just spent all that money on a Jeep, and you can't do this, really? Okay, so it is the only way, Jesus, and he's telling us that. And again, all these scriptures point one direction. In the Old Testament and the New Testament, they point to Jesus. So there are a lot of roads out here. But for me to get to Alex's house, I'm not going to say Gary because I know Alex has invited you. So to get to Alex's house, there's one way I go. Okay, and the way that God says it is, I am the way, the truth, and the light. I am. So there's no way, no other way of doing it. And again, I'm going to emphasize, if you do this at home, and hopefully you'll sit down and try doing this, because I got a lot out of this. There's so many different verses that you can point to each commandment from taking it out and from the New Testament and adapting to what I'm doing, the similarities and the differences. Neither of these verses leave room for interpretation. And I love that. I hate, well, your interpretation is different than my interpretation. I was like, dude, it tells you to go left. Go left. If it tells you to go right, go right. If it tells you to stop, stop. It's not interpretation. Just read it. Differences. Anybody have any differences? So, again, Exodus 20 verse 4 is a commandment. John 14:6 is a personal claim. So, the commandment is a Mosaic law. Personal claim, Jesus identifies himself as a means to get to heaven, to get to God. One says, do not, and the other one says, come through me. Any other differences? I have a few more. Anybody have any? So, I love, when I was working in restaurants, I would tell people, I learned how to interview people because I had to do a lot of interviewing. So I'd have, especially kids today, 17, 18-year-olds getting their first job. I would meet them somewhere like a Starbucks, and I said, okay, you don't have a job. What if I asked you, you don't have any experience, why would I hire you? I have this many applicants. What would you say? And most of them would say, but you turn every negative into a positive. What do I mean by that? You don't have any experience. Why would I hire you? You're right, sir, I don't have any experience. I also don't have any bad habits that I would learn from other restaurants. So the way you teach me would be the correct way, and I would learn the correct way. You turn a negative into a positive. So one says, do not do this, and the other one says, come through me. I think the world thinks that the Old Testament and the Ten Commandments, all the do nots are negatives, and the come through me is a positive. I say, nay, nay. I think they're both positive. When I start telling people or teaching people that, it's, what do you mean? If somebody says, don't touch that, that's hot. Is that negative? I don't think so. If I was about to touch something and somebody says, hey, don't touch that, that's hot, I would say, thank you. That's a positive. So all the do nots, I think they're positives. One is prohibited, it forbids making images, and the other one is the declaration and invitation. It presents Jesus as the way. Any questions, comments?
One's got a nicer tone to it, but they're both instructing us how to please God.
Yes. Again, sometimes I know me, because not as much anymore. I'm getting a little smarter. But when I was 18 years old, I didn't need, hey, don't do that. That's bad. If my dad would have done that, I would have just looked at him and started laughing behind his back. I was afraid of that man. But my dad treated me the way I needed to be treated when I was 18. So I understand what you said, and I totally agree with it, but there's times where we need the, hey, pay attention. Sorry if I scooped. Anything else? All right, let's go to Exodus 20, verse 7. Exodus 20, verse 7. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not leave him unpunished who takes his name in vain. John 13, verse 34 and 35. And again, I hope you do this at home sometime this week and pick your own verses. John 13, 34, 35. A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another, even as I've loved you, that you also love one another. By this all men will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another. Now, what has that got to do with not taking the Lord's name in vain? What are the similarities in that?
If you love somebody, you wouldn't use their name in a bad way.
Oh, she's a keeper, Mick. She is a keeper. My boss used to use Jesus' name in vain all the time. My old boss, sorry, not my 3 bosses now. So I used to work at Clean Jumper, and that guy, everything that happened bad, somebody dropped a plate, somebody rung in the wrong food, we got the wrong kind of shrimp, Jesus' name in vain. At first I was like, that's him, he doesn't believe in Jesus, I do, and then it started bothering me. So this guy was kind of scary. He was like 6'4" and mean and yelled at everybody. Great manager, but very sturgeon. That's a good word. And he kept doing it, and then finally I said, I'm going to say something, and I was going to tell him next time, and he said it. Boom, I was right next to him, and I just looked at him and I said, "You're right, sir, Muhammad." And I turned around and walked away. Didn't say anything else, and he just went. An hour later, I'm walking through the kitchen, something bad happens, he said it again. I said, "Buddha!" Only took 2. He knew exactly what I was doing. Never said it in front of me again. I think part of that was I was tired of hearing it, and part of it I was really scared to confront him. So it kind of worked out. But one focuses on honoring his name and the commandment that we have not to do it. The other one is kind of a commandment too. Well, it is a new commandment, sorry. But identifying who we are and how we do it. And how valuable we as Christians hold that name, love on that name, and tell others about that name. So, how did you say it?
I don't know.
If you love,
If you love somebody, then you don't want to value them by abusing their name, especially God.
So the similarities are both are commandments. Exodus 27 tells us, tells people what not to do. John 13:34 tells people what to do. In both cases, God's reputation is central. In Exodus, misusing God's name damages how God is honored and is to be honored. In John, loving one another shows the world what Jesus is like and who we are to be like. Neither command is purely private. Both are kind of external, that we show who we belong to outwardly. And a lot of times where I tell the kids, and not just in class, but when we're out doing something, it's great to do something really nice for someone, but let them know who you did it for. A couple of things I hate when I ask a question in class and they go, I said, who? I said, is that a question or an answer? So we're to go out boldly proclaiming his name, the name that we love and honor and cherish. Any comments? So Exodus prohibits us from misusing his name. John actively lets us love one another using his name. One of the differences that I looked and I researched this, so in Exodus it focuses on God's name, and then in John it focuses on God's character. So that's the same but different. I hate using that way, but it's the same but different. One talks about his name, and the other one talks about his character. His character is love, so that's what makes it the same. But his name is God, Jehovah, El Shaddai, so that makes it the same. Hopefully I didn't confuse anybody. I've made it as clear as mud on that one. Anything different? Anything else? In Exodus 20 verse 7, protects God's honor by regulating how people invoke his name. John 13, 34, 35 protects God's honor by shaping how people imitate him. So one basically says, don't misrepresent God with your words. And the other one says, represent God with your love. All right. So next week, we're going to start with verse 8 and go from there. Any other questions, comments, concerns? You can Zoom from Australia if you want. Anything else? We're all good? Thank you guys for paying attention.